How's it going, everybody? I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And welcome back to another episode of Grail or Garbage, the show where I systematically and categorically break down just how good or bad knives like this Spyderco Manix 2 really are. You see, I've had this knife in my collection now for the last 2 years, and it's given me a chance to use it, abuse it, sharpen it, and abuse it again. That means that I've had the opportunity to really ask and answer the tough questions. Questions like, how good is the lock? Is it comfortable in the hand? Is it something that's fun to fidget with? Now that I've done that, there's really only one question left to answer. Is the Spyderco Manix 2 a Grail, or is it garbage? So let's go ahead and take a look at the current leaderboard at the time of recording this video. Our top two knives with scores of 39 are the Spyderco Para 3 and the Spyderco Smock. Now, if you're new here, go ahead and stick around. If you've been here before and you know what this is, feel free to skip ahead in the next few minutes. But for everybody else that hasn't seen this before, the way the scoring works is that we have 5 categories. The categories are materials, ergonomics, fidget factor, the lock, and fit and finish. Each category is worth a max of 10 points, with 1 point being utter garbage and 10 points being absolutely excellent. And then, of course, you can get a total overall score of 50. Anything above 40 is a Grail. We haven't got there yet. We've gotten close. 31 to 40 is a high recommend. 21 to 30 is a low recommend. 11 to 20 is nothing special. And of course, if you're below 11 points, it's garbage. Just like I haven't reviewed a Grail yet, I haven't reviewed anything that's utter garbage. So far, everything has been in the realm of 28 to 39, and that is mainly because I don't buy knives that I don't like. So, now that you know how this works, I will put a link to the Grail or Garbage explanation video if you would like a deeper explanation. Let's go ahead and get started. This is the Spyderco Manix 2. Now, I've already reviewed this knife, and if you'd like to see an in-depth review on this, I'll go ahead and link it in the top of the screen. Feel free to check that out. You can pause this, watch that, and come back. Whatever suits your fancy. And if you're looking for more of an in-depth review, that's the one you'd want to watch anyways. If you want to see how this Spyderco Manix 2 really stacks up against other knives that I've ranked on this leaderboard, this is for you. Let's start with the first category. The first category is materials. Now, as I mentioned, we're looking at G10, S30V, steel liners, stamped pocket clip. Everything is in context with what it costs. This knife, depending upon what variation of this knife you get, costs anywhere in the realm of $130 to $180. I've seen them in a ton of different blade steels and in different handle scale materials. For the purpose of this ranking, I will be going off of the standard variant, which is G10 handle scales, S30V steel. Black with black DLC coating. I think the coating is important too, because diamond light coatings are just awesome. They do smudge easily, but they're just awesome. So, to go along with how I've been ranking these based on price, for under $150, or at roughly at the $150 or less range, these materials are good. They're not absolutely amazing, but they are good. Considering that you can get a Demco 80-20.5 with Oz 10A as well as Grivery, these materials are decent, especially for that price range, and Spyderco does them well. That is enough for me to give the material score a solid 7 out of 10. So, the next question is ergonomics. How are the ergonomics? If we were to compare this against the Spyderco Para 3, the Spyderco Para 3 got a very, very high ergonomics score because it just felt right in the hand. It felt good. And this has very similar lines. These cutouts right here, the scalloping does tell you where to put your fingers, but you also get a very aggressive front finger choil, which allows for a nice forward grip and extra control towards the tip of the blade. That is very nice. However, There is one thing that I am not a huge fan of, and I'm going to show you right now. You see those teeth right there? They stick up ever so slightly. Now, if you're wearing gloves, that could be a good thing. However, most of us don't go through life every day wearing gloves. And so that means that for the rest of us normies, we're out here gripping the Manix 2 like this, with your fingers square on those teeth. It's not a problem if you have a lighter grip, but if you're really bearing down on it, you're doing some more hard use type things, you're going to feel it, and that does affect the comfort level. That is the only spot on the knife that is uncomfortable, but something that I noticed is the more you bear down on this knife, the more you notice that. And the more you notice that, the more you notice this atrocious pocket clip, which, while some might not think that it holds a place in the ergonomics section, I do, because this has been Spyderco's downfall for years. For years, they have failed to update their clip. The only other clip they come out with is a wire clip, but this one is just not great. And I wouldn't ordinarily consider it a hot spot, except for the fact that when you pair it with this rear jimping, something that I just don't really see a purpose for most people's use cases, it does lower the score enough to cause this to be a 6 out of 10 for ergonomics. The ergonomics are okay. They would be a lot better without this. And while you could definitely sand those down, you really shouldn't have to on a brand new knife. And unless you wear gloves every day, that is actually something to consider. Moving on to Fidget Factor. How fun is this knife to play with? Well, the truth is that it's actually pretty fun to play with, and that has a lot to do with how you actuate the ball bearing lock. This lock is something that is similar. Notice how I didn't say the same. It's similar to the way that an axis lock works, except this doesn't have an omega spring. Instead, there is a ball bearing that slides up and down on a regular spring. That regular spring is not set to wear out like omega springs do. I haven't yet read a use case where someone has needed to replace that spring, but if you did need to, I read on Spyderco's webpage that they can and will replace that spring if it wears out. It's just a joy. Most Spyderco knives are fidgety enough just with that Spidey hole, with the exception of their lockbacks, because their lockbacks aren't really quite snappy for flipping open. Those are more of a manual use case scenario. But for everybody else, the Spidey hole is nice, and with that alone, it's fun to fidget with. Is it, oh my god, out of this world insane? No, but it is pretty damn good. Good enough for me to score it a 7 out of 10. Next up, we've got the lock, and I did mention this a little bit like I usually do in the fidget area, and that is the ball bearing lock. The ball bearing lock is, in fact, the strongest lock that Spyderco has made to date. And if you feel like quoting me or doing some research, just go ahead and look up Spyderco lock test on YouTube, and you'll see that they put this against the compression lock, they put it against the back lock, they put it against the liner lock, they put it against the frame lock, and guess what? This ball bearing lock will definitely hold more poundage before breaking and failing than a back lock. So all of you out there who are like, oh my gosh, the back lock is the best because grandpa had it correct. Listen, back lock is a great lock for hard use. This one's better. Yes, it depends upon a spring, but for everyday use case scenarios, it is better. Good enough, in fact, for me to score this an 8 out of 10 for the lock. It's unique, it's not an axis lock, and it's a strong lock that is something that allows you to fidget with it. So it's easy to actuate. For those reasons, it's an 8 out of 10. Now, it's been not quite so long a road. We're at the last category, and that last category is fit and finish. How did it come from the factory? And you might think that this is a tough question for me to answer, given that I've used it, abused it, you know, put a new edge on it, abused it, put another edge on it. And so you're like, man, you're so far removed from the factory condition. How can you really talk about fit and finish? Well, that's actually a really easy question for me to answer. First and foremost, I've never come across a Spyderco knife that, for one, didn't have a good heat treat, and for two, wasn't sharp from the factory. The fit and finish on here is pretty damn good. The edge lasted me a long time, and only after I utterly destroyed it, I decided that it was time to put a high bevel on this knife. Now I might be referencing that, but it's a taller bevel than what comes on the edge to begin with, and I even put a polished bevel on there. But it was shaving sharp from the factory, and despite how much wear and tear I've put on this, the diamond light coating that they applied has allowed it to stay looking good for the last 2 years, despite this being my most heavily used and abused Spyderco. Now you can tell if you look closely at the G10 handle scales, I have carried this a lot. I've chopped down cardboard boxes, opened packages, cut my food. The only spot on here that isn't knocked down is this absolutely horrendous rear jimping, which I already mentioned in the ergonomics, but I can only assume that it's supposed to be that way. And those teeth, they are rounded off. It's not like, you know, you're going to draw blood every time you grip this thing. There is one thing that I will say about the fit and finish, and that is that there is a bit of a break-in period, because when you buy this brand new, this ball bearing lock is stiff. The spring is stiff. And especially if you get one with the DLC coating like this, the detent that rides against this, it needs some time to wear against the tang of the blade. And so it's not necessarily fall shut immediately. And if it is, you have to put a lot of torquage on this lock before it starts falling shut. I've never adjusted this pivot. I've never actually taken this knife apart. I've never seen a need to. There have been a few times where I applied some oil, I just sprayed it down in there, you know, actuated it a few times. But other than that, I've never had to take this knife apart. Fit and finish is good. When you have a knife for 2 years and you never feel the need to take it apart, that's a good sign. Because of the break-in period, however, that means that fit and finish is going to score a 7 out of 10. So we hit all 5 categories. For materials, we got 7 out of 10. Ergonomics is a 6 out of 10. The Fidget Factor is a 7 out of 10. The lock is the high score of 8 for this knife, and fit and finish is a solid 7, giving us a total of 35 out of 50. That's going to put this knife in the high recommend category, smack dab in the middle of it. Is it the best Spyderco that I own according to this ranking system? No, that would be the Para 3 and the Smock currently. Keep in mind, I also haven't ranked the Yojimbo 2, which is another knife in my collection, or the Paramilitary 2, or the Shaman, or any of the other Spyderco knives that I will get around to ranking. This is going to put it above the Cold Steel 8015 and below the Orion Knife Scorpio. It's a solid score for a solid knife, especially when you consider that you can get this for as low as around $130, or if you really want to get a nice tough steel material, I know you can get this in Maximate, which is really great for edge retention. That's going to be on the higher range. But in that price range, scoring a 35 is phenomenal. Spyderco always does a great job hardening their steels. They frequently have some of the best factory HRC numbers out there, especially for this price range. And so yeah, it's a knife that I could recommend to everybody. I feel like everyone should have at least one Spyderco in their collection. And if you need something that you're going to use pretty heftily, I feel pretty good recommending this one. Guys, that's all I've got for you. If you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button. If you didn't like it, great news. There's a button for you as well. And if you want to see more just like this, make sure that you subscribe. Other than that, my friends, I'll see you on the flip side.